My grandson leaned in, small hand cupped to my ear, and ripped the floor out from under me. My own child was planning to ship me to safety, seize my accounts, and film my forgetfulness like evidence. "Grandpa, they said they'll take all your money." The cruelty wasn't loud, it was careful. Forms slipped under coffee, passwords for convenience, a smiling tour of a place I'd never chosen. That whisper turned grief into voltage. I didn't raise my voice, I raised paper. Revoked signatures, locked accounts, a living trust with my name on the switch. If they wanted me helpless, they'd have to get past proof. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I retired the spring I turned 64 after 35 years riding bucket trucks and climbing poles through dust storms and monsoon squalls. The soundtrack of that life still hums in my bones. Boot spikes biting creosote, a torque wrench's clean click, wind whispering along the line like current you can hear. 2 months after I hung up my climbing hooks, my wife's heart failed in the quiet way bad weather sometimes arrives. The house in Las Cruces went hollow. Hinges sighed. Floorboards answered my steps. The refrigerator's motor became a metronome, counting a rhythm I couldn't keep. Maya, my daughter, arrived with grocery lists and kindness that sounded like instructions, which is how kindness sometimes has to sound when the bigger thing can't be fixed. She wanted me closer to her and to Leo, my 9-year-old grandson who collects wind facts the way other kids collect trading cards. "Take the ground floor room," she said, "just until you feel steady." Trevor, her husband, offered to help organize the paperwork so you don't have to think about it. It was easier to nod than to argue with good intentions, so I nodded and let the current carry me north to Santa Fe. I packed like a man who has learned what matters. 2 duffels, my old ham radio, and a dented metal case of documents. Pension statements, the life insurance policy, the deed to Las Cruces. I kept the case close the way I once kept a voltage tester at my hip. The house had become too big for one shadow and too full of objects tuned to a voice I wouldn't hear again. I told the agent to hang a sign. The offer came fast. Closing came faster. Movement, even small, feels like making a choice. Santa Fe gave me a routine built from quieter parts. I wake before dawn, grind beans, and let the radio skim the airwaves. Dispatchers, weather, the low hum of a state waking up. Leo pads into the kitchen when the toaster clicks. We knock on the window to taste the air and guess wind speed before the app loads. In the garage, we're assembling a model wind turbine kit that promises real power. He reads the instructions like scripture. I hold tiny screws in fingers that once hauled crossarms heavier than he is. It is good to be necessary to someone who doesn't ask for the older version of you. Maya swears I don't have to pay for anything, but I tuck grocery cash under the sugar canister and cover the internet when the bill lands crooked on the counter. She added me as an authorized user on a card in case you need gas or something. I barely touch it. Trevor says he can scan and sort my papers and get everything in one place. He moves like a man who believes a miter saw and a weekend can fix most things. I let him take a small stack, copies, not originals. Old habits, earned in storms, keep their shape. Friends from the utility text trout photos from Abiquiu Lake and invite me to stand in cold water with them on Saturdays. I answer that I'm tied up with Leo's soccer and send a thumbs up I don't mean. The truth is I have the time. What I lack is the will to be the man who came home smelling like rain and cut grass, the man who fell asleep during westerns because someone warm leaned on his shoulder. Grief throws a long shadow. It arrives early, leaves late, and teaches you to walk a little sideways. Nights are the most complicated. The Santa Fe house speaks in a different register, the kind that hangs at the edge of conversation. I lie in the ground floor room Maya painted a color called sand bloom and count the ticks of the air purifier like mile markers on a highway I used to drive. Sometimes Leo tiptoes in with a flashlight and an anemometer fact. I pretend to be surprised when he explains how cups catch wind, though he's told me 3 times. He grins like he invented weather. That grin restores something the day keeps stealing. I catch myself narrating my hours like a work order: evaluate, isolate, repair, restore. I remind myself I am lucky, steady on a step stool, strong enough to carry 2 bags of softener salt, clear-eyed enough to read the small print without squinting. I remind myself I am useful. Someone has to stir green chili into the stew, double knot Leo's cleats, look up from the porch and call rain before the radar turns green. Need is a kind of current. Handled right, it keeps the lights on without burning the house down. One afternoon, while Trevor clamped cedar boards in the garage and the shop vac moaned like a distant transformer, Maya slid a manila folder onto the kitchen island and suggested we streamline the banking stuff. She spoke the way people speak when they relabel pantry jars. "It's simpler if we keep your mail here for now," she said. I nodded too quickly. A widower, a father, a lineman, I've stood in bigger storms than a new return address. Still, after they went to bed, I moved the metal case from the hall closet to under my bed, handle out where my hand could find it in the dark. I am not suspicious. I am prepared. The difference, as any lineman will tell you, is whether you expect lightning or simply admit that summer carries it. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, poured coffee, and stood at the window counting porch boards between knotholes. The day looked ordinary as a pocket knife. I believed I had reached a gentler stretch of line, the part after the last hard climb where the truck idles, the wind rests, and the sky holds. I believed family was the station at the end of the route, the place you hang your hard hat and keep your boots by the door. Belief isn't proof. It's just a map you hope matches the ground. I folded mine and put it back in my pocket, finished my coffee, and tuned the radio until the weather came in clear. Somewhere north, gusts were building over the ridge. The turbine kit on the workbench waited for our next bolt and washer. The manila folder sat where Maya had left it, patient as a checklist. The house exhaled. I told myself this was what a safe harbor felt like. Nothing remarkable at all, just a day that held. I didn't yet know how quickly an ordinary morning can tilt, how a small voice can carry more charge than a storm. Saturday afternoon light slanted through the garage window, turning sawdust into a slow snowfall that never touched the floor. Trevor's shop in the back hummed with the long, even whine of a table saw, a sound that felt like a held breath. Leo and I were aligning the plastic nacelle of our toy turbine when he leaned in close enough that I could smell the shampoo Maya buys on sale and calls adventure. He cupped a hand to my ear the way kids do when they've learned secrets have weight. "They're taking you to Cedar Ridge," he whispered. "They said it's safer if they keep all your money." My hand tightened around the wire cutter until the handles bit half moons into my palm. For a beat, the world lifted off its screws, just a hair, then settled again with a click that wasn't entirely reassuring. I set the tool down. The trick learned on storm calls is to make your face go quiet while your mind comes alive. "Thanks for telling me," I said, keeping my voice level. "You did the right thing." He watched my expression the way a sailor watches the sky. I tapped the nacelle, told him we'd finish the hub tomorrow, and sent him inside for lemonade. When he was gone, I wiped my hands on a rag already striped with work, then walked to the house as if I had remembered something small and unimportant, which is another trick you learn when lightning is in the area. In the ground floor room, I slid the metal case from under the bed, the handle warm against my skin. The latches popped like knuckles. Papers breathed. Pension statements. The life insurance policy, its legalese fossilized in a language that pretends it isn't talking about love and death. The packet from the Las Cruces sale with its clean arithmetic and small relief. I stacked the documents by category the way we sort hardware, washers with washers, bolts with bolts, then unfolded the most recent card statement Maya said I could use for gas or something. There it was, a column of charges dressed in tidy type, each line a bowed head. Hardware chains, lumber yards, a high-end design supply with a West Coast zip code I couldn't place. Interior materials, all of them with amounts that didn't belong to my life. The dates lined up with weekends Trevor's shop had posted new cabinets on social media. I traced one entry with a finger and felt the old part of my brain that once mapped circuits light up. I reached for my phone and scrolled to the contact Renee Park. A coworker from the utility had said, "She's the one you call when you need the ground to hold." The line picked up on the first ring. "Can you meet at 2 on Canyon Road?" I asked. "Today." "2 works," she said. "Bring everything." I ended the call and dialed the bank, shifting into the voice I used to speak into radios during outages. Calm, clipped, no air for argument. I requested temporary holds on automatic transfers, added hard token authentication, and changed the priority contact number. The representative read back the changes, each confirmation a knot tugged tight. Outside, the saw turned off and the house took a deep breath. At the desk, I pulled a legal pad and drew 3 columns because people like me trust a plan we can see. Weaknesses, loneliness, the fog that follows grief, the guilt of moving into your child's house and wondering if you take up too much air. Strengths, a clean memory for numbers and sequences, tidy records, a lifetime of tracing failures backward to the first bad splice. Goals, separate finances, secure the accounts. Slow the story down until truth can catch up. I knocked on Leo's door. He looked up from a book about storms, his finger keeping his place like a stake in the ground. "I need you to keep what you told me between us for now," I said. "Tell the truth if you're asked anything, but don't add, don't guess." "Okay," he said. "Promise?" "Promise," I said, because promises matter most when wind picks up. I checked my wallet, the prepaid phone I keep for banks and doctors, the small list I carry, folded like a bandage. The metal case went back under the bed, but thinner. The key papers slid into a backpack alongside a pen that writes on damp paper. I took the side door instead of the hall, old habit, and paused on the back step long enough to let my breath match the day. When you're climbing, panic wastes energy you'll need at the top. As I crossed the driveway, the table saw wind alive again, long, steady, confident. I followed the fence line past the herb pots, turned at the gate, and let the Santa Fe light lay a hand on my shoulder. The air was the kind that dries sweat before it remembers to shine. I walked like a man who was going to buy screws and instead was going to buy time. On the sidewalk, I felt the click inside, the one you feel before you throw a breaker. For a while after my wife died, I had let others put their hands on the panel, just to help, just for now. It is easy to confuse help with a hand on your throat when you are tired enough. I pictured my life as a service box with too many unfamiliar labels and reached up in my mind to flip every switch back to manual. In my head, I drafted what I would hand to Renee at 2. The statement with the design shop charges circled, the sale documents, the policy, a timeline, and my own block letters. I added questions like a checklist, how to redirect statements, how to force 2 signatures for withdrawals, how to document a pattern without turning my grandson's home into a courtroom. Plans settle me. They always have. It's not that I don't trust people. It's that I trust systems more when I'm the one holding the test light. At the corner, I stopped for a car that looked like the future trying to pass the present and failing. I thought of Maya as a little girl running in a backyard that smelled like wet creosote, the way she once put her hand on my cheek after a lightning strike knocked out half the county and said, "You smell like rain." I let that memory stand next to the folder on the counter and refused to let them cancel each other. The house behind me exhaled again, the road ahead kinked toward Canyon. The clock on my wrist clicked past 1. I walked lighter than I had a few minutes earlier, with the simple relief that comes every time you stop borrowing trouble and start drawing a map. By sundown, I would have a plan and a lawyer who spoke in sentences with ends on them. For now, the day held. That was enough to move in. The cafe on Canyon Road smelled like burned sugar and hot metal, the way a grinder breathes when beans are fresh. I arrived 10 minutes early with my backpack and the metal case tucked under my arm like a toolbox. Light from the high desert rinsed the tables. Baristas moved with the brisk choreography of people who know where everything lives. I chose a corner near the window and laid out 3 neat stacks. Las Cruces sale packet, pension and insurance, the card statements with interior materials circled in red. Storm maps of a different kind. Renee Park came in on the dot, slate gray blazer, hair pinned back as if arguments might otherwise snag it. She shook my hand once, sat, and began scanning the piles with the speed of someone tracing a circuit. Her pen made check marks that sounded like distant rain. "We start by isolating the vulnerable lines," she said. "Tell me what you need," I said. She slid the statements toward me, tapped the merchant list, and nodded as if a meter had just settled on a reading. This pattern, third-party purchases routed through an authorized user, often precedes guardianship petitions. We revoke any power of attorney in play and write new ones, financial and health care. I breathed out slowly. "Do it." We drafted the revocations first, language spare and sharp. The new financial POA named me primary and an old colleague, Cal Torres, as backup, not family. The healthcare power of attorney did the same. Renee scheduled a mobile notary for late afternoon. The documents would be signed, witnessed, scanned, and uploaded to a private drive she set up on the spot. She moved my fingers to the signature flags like a flight instructor guiding a student to the yoke. Next came the shell I'd live inside, a revocable living trust. My name as grantor and trustee. The trust's name sober as a courthouse, Hale Family Living Trust, dated today. The trust would receive the Las Cruces proceeds, my savings, any insurance still payable to me. Distributions were clear. I controlled all income and principal while living and competent. On my death, Leo inherited when he turned 25, with a small education allotment available earlier if needed. Renee added a successor trustee list, Cal first, then a professional fiduciary, so that no relative could accidentally end up at the panel. "Banks listen to trust documents like they listen to court orders," she said. "We carry this with us." We walked 2 blocks to the credit union that serves line workers and utility staff. I opened a new account and opted into every friction point available. Hard token authentication for logins and transfers, text and email alerts for anything over $50, daily summaries by 9 p.m. I changed the priority contact number to the prepaid phone and gave a secondary email I created at the table. Hail trust at a provider no one in the house uses. The banker, a woman with the patient voice of someone who balances books for sport, read the changes back. I felt the knots tighten and hold. Back at the cafe, Renee drafted a letter to the card issuer. Cancel the authorized user immediately. Issue a fresh card and number for me alone, and provide line item documentation for the interior materials charges, merchant invoices, shipping addresses, signed receipts. Tone neutral, verbs plain. She copied me in the trust email, then set a tickler for follow-up in 72 hours. "Paper first, feelings later," she said, smiling like a person who prefers torque specs to pep talks. We mapped the physical part of safety. A 1-bedroom near the rail yard district, small but bright, within quick distance of the bank, her office, and my doctor. 6 months prepaid from the trust, lease signed under the trust name. She had a vetted list. I circled a second-floor unit with a balcony and a deadbolt that had not learned to be lazy. "Tomorrow you move documents. You can sleep one more night where you are," she said, "but no more new information enters that house." I bought a sturdy folder, scanned everything we'd signed, and uploaded the files to the drive. A new email pinged, a confirmation from the bank that alerts were active. I put the prepaid phone and a hard token in my shirt pocket, the way I once carried a tester. I wrote a short checklist on a cafe receipt, today 48 hours 1 week, and folded it into my wallet. Evaluate, isolate, repair, restore. The old sequence fit the new storm. By late afternoon, I was back in the kitchen, where the light cools blue and the tile holds the day's heat. I browned pork shoulder, tipped in green chili and onion, and let the pot settle into its slow talk. The house was quiet except for Trevor's sander feeding dust to the small cyclone in his shop. I set the table like always, bowls, spoons, a plate of warm tortillas wrapped in a dish towel that belonged to my wife. Maya came in, cheeks flushed, opened a cabinet, then leaned against the counter. "Cedar Ridge called," she said. "They have gardening programs and live music on Fridays. The cactus garden is supposed to be gorgeous." "That sounds nice," I said, stirring. The spoon drew a figure 8 that turned into a plan. Eat, rinse, sleep, and at daylight carry the documents out one door and the day's worry out another. At dinner, I asked Leo about spelling and pretended not to notice that his eyes kept tracking my face for weather. I passed Trevor the salt. He said thanks without looking up. We ate the way people eat when everyone is timing the other's breath. After dishes, I wiped the counter until it squeaked, turned off lights, and pocketed the prepaid phone. In my room, I slid the metal case under the bed again, this time only a third full. I put the trust binder and the new folder into the backpack and leaned it by the door. The notary stamp shone faintly through the manila like a coin under thin cloth. I lay down and counted the purifier's ticks, one for today's signatures, one for the trust name that sounds like a promise, one for Leo's steady whisper in the garage. I slept under my daughter's roof and my own rules. In the morning, I would move quietly, the way you do on a pole when wind rises. I would carry proof, not fear. They believed I would behave. I believed I would hold the line. Sunday began the way good Sundays do, with clean light through the kitchen blinds and the smell of coffee finding its way into corners. From the back of the house, the shop vac droned, a steady counterpoint to birds on the fence. Trevor cleaning up yesterday's sawdust, as if order were a virtue you could plug in. I moved like any man moving inside his own morning, rinsed a cup, checked the porch for wind, straightened the towel on the oven handle. On the inside, though, the needle no longer idled at 0. After the meeting with Renee, I could feel the system humming, each step waiting its turn. Maya came to the island with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and set down a crisp form. "Emergency contact update," she said. "Clinic wants this on file." The paper wore hospital blue and had the unthreatening layout of a school permission slip, but along the bottom margin a string of small type ran like a hairline crack in porcelain. I lifted my glasses, read each clause once, then again. The sentence was tidy and non-committal. Authority to manage finances if necessary. Necessary to whom and decided by whom were left to the imagination. "I'll take this to my doctor," I said, tapping the corner with one finger, "and ask what they recommend." Her smile held a second longer than natural, then slid off. Trevor, passing through for more contractor bags, glanced down and away like a man checking a level he already knows is out. I slid the form beneath the pad where I keep grocery lists and wrote nothing on it at all. Before 9, I phoned 3 men who would pick up for me under any sky. The first 2 numbers rolled to voicemail with a sameness that felt planned rather than unlucky. The third answered and cleared his throat. He said he'd heard from Maya that I was needing quiet and preferred not to be disturbed. I thanked him for the courtesy and hung up. On my legal pad, I wrote the time, the initials, the phrasing. In lineman work, we call it a continuity test. Does the circuit connect where it should? That morning, continuity lived elsewhere. By mid-morning, my inbox coughed up an email with crisp edges. Cedar Ridge Social Services requesting a cognitive evaluation, complete with a link to pre-visit history and a friendly reminder about guardianship options. At the bottom, in the space where authority lives, it read, "Contact per authorization of Trevor Pike." I took screenshots that caught the timestamp and the sender's domain and forwarded the message to Renee with a subject line that fit the facts. Then I walked to the window and watched a dry leaf skate down the driveway like a small thing trying not to be seen. Renee replied in minutes. She would draft a letter revoking any claim permission to communicate about my care and direct all contacts to me or to her office. I texted back what I had already decided. I would schedule my own evaluation with a geriatrician not affiliated with Cedar Ridge. The rule, going forward, would be simple and written down: medical and legal matters run through me or counsel, period. On the dining table, I spread the last 10 months the way a crew spreads a service map across a hood. Grocery receipts, utility bills, Leo's school supply lists, gas station slips, my handwriting marching up margins where totals hide. The number built itself in quiet pieces until it stood on the page with a confidence I wished I felt. More than $22,000 in household costs I had carried. I highlighted interior materials on the card statement and checked them against Pike and Pine social posts. New cabinet photos aligned neatly with purchase dates. Shipping addresses didn't match our house. Patterns do not confess, but they nod when you've named them correctly. In the kitchen, talk turned, as it always does, to the shape of the future. Cedar Ridge is so professional, Trevor said, reading from a brochure he didn't bother to unfold. They specialize in safety and routine. Maya stared at the rim of her mug. I rinsed the French press and set it to dry. Safety for whom, I asked, and kept my tone even. Any decisions regarding my life go through me. The room cooled a degree. We are a family that does not shout. We are also a family that hears perfectly well when a line has been marked. I told them we should meet at Renee's office to talk it through with the paperwork in the same room. I sent a calendar invite from the trust email, copied their addresses and the firm's main line, then placed my phone face down on the counter. The choice of venue matters. Storm calls are handled at the yard, not yelled across a backyard fence. The rest of the day I behaved as if nothing had shifted. I fixed a loose hinge on the pantry door so it would stop squealing its disapproval. I took the trash to the curb with the Sunday paper folded under my arm. I trimmed the spent blooms off the pots by the steps. Inside, I slipped fresh copies of key documents into my backpack and checked the hard token and prepaid phone. I deleted spam, archived the important, and left the house the way I found it, only cleaner. Discipline keeps a man from falling off a pole. Before you climb, you check your belt, you clip your lanyard, you test the wood. The same rules apply when the weather is emotional instead of electrical. I watched Leo on the couch, reading about hurricanes. He tapped a map with his thumb and told me the difference between a watch and a warning. I laughed, then wrote that distinction under my to-do list. I had moved us from watch to warning and given the wind a name. Before dinner, I texted Renee to confirm the notary and the meeting time. She replied with the same small thumbs up she'd used on other clients bound for rough weather. I browned onions and stirred the pan until the smell said home. When we ate, I asked Leo about his spelling words and complimented a small success that had nothing to do with money or forms. After dishes, I wiped the counter until it squeaked and turned off the lights. The house felt like a stage set before a blackout, everything in its place, every prop prepped for the next beat. I lay down in the ground floor room and counted the ticks of the purifier until they matched my breathing. Tomorrow the talk would happen on my ground, with chairs, with signatures, with witnesses. Tonight I kept the line clear and the breaker on my side. If this moment has you thinking hard about what comes next, leave a number 1 in the comments to show you're with me. Now, let's continue the journey. I set the table as if muscle memory could sweeten the air. Bowls nested atop warm tortillas, spoons aligned like silver reeds, the dish towel my wife used to fold with her thumbs pressed along the seam. The stew worked in low murmurs on the back burner, green chili and onions telling the room to relax. In the quiet between bubbles, you could hear the house listening to itself, the tick of the clock, the soft compressor sigh from the fridge, Trevor's shop sander spinning down in the garage. I placed a manila folder on the empty chair beside me and sat. My hands didn't shake. They had climbed poles in bad wind and come back whole. Maya arrived first, cheeks wind-burned, ponytail loosening. Cedar Ridge called again, she said, sliding her phone face down. They have gardening on Saturdays, music on Fridays. The line landed flat, practiced, almost gentle. I stirred the pot and tasted for salt, the spoon tracing an 8 that split and rejoined. That sounds nice, I said. The folder waited with the patience of paper. Leo drifted in and out, sniffing at tortillas, orbiting us like a moon that keeps decent distance when tides are odd. His eyes read the room the way kids read weather. I gave him a nod, a small lighthouse on a low coast. Trevor came last, hands scrubbed but still carrying cedar in their lines. He complimented the smell and complimented himself for saying so. We ate in a rhythm without conversation, the kind of family choreography where bowls and hands find their marks on a stage that is familiar and a little too bright. Halfway through, Maya cleared her throat and adjusted a napkin that didn't need adjusting. "We should stop by Cedar Ridge this weekend," she said. "They've penciled us in at 10. I set my spoon down. "Perfect timing," I said, and placed the manila folder on the table. "I updated some things this morning." The doorbell rang like a cue line. I wiped my hands and opened the door to Renee Park, whose blazer always looks like it knows the rules. She greeted us by name, asked if we could use the table so everything is transparent, and took the chair across from Trevor. Leo, bless him, was already collecting his homework, a self-directed exit we had rehearsed without speaking. When his footsteps thinned out on the stairs, Renee opened her case. The air changed a half degree, the way air changes right before a summer truck backs into a muddy easement and the crew steps out wearing serious hats. "We'll be concise," Renee said. "Mr. Hale has revoked all prior powers of attorney. These are the new documents, financial and health care, naming Mr. Hale as the decision-maker with Cal Torres as successor, not family." She laid down the stamped pages, witnesses' signatures puckering the paper like small, orderly waves. Copies are notarized, scanned, and secured. I watched the moment the words landed. Trevor's jaw went tight at the hinge. Maya took one of those careful breaths you learn in a yoga class. Renee continued, her voice tuned to a frequency between calm and unarguable. "We also established a revocable living trust. Funds from the Las Cruces sale, savings, and any applicable insurance are being moved into the trust this week. Mr. Hale retains full control while living and competent. Upon his death, distributions follow the schedule here." She turned a tabbed page. Primary beneficiary Leo Hale at age 25, with a limited education allotment available beforehand. Successor trustee if needed. Mr. Torres, then a professional fiduciary. I added the other fact that mattered to people who test fences. Banking now requires hard token authentication and alerts trigger at low thresholds. I slid my own paperwork forward, a one-page summary of 10 months' household expenses I had absorbed, groceries, utilities, school supplies, totaled north of $22,000. Beneath it, the card statement with interior materials marked and indexed to Pike and Pine's happy cabinet photos. Shipped to addresses did not include our home. Patterns don't accuse, they illuminate. Renee placed an envelope atop the stack. "This is a formal demand. Cancel the authorized user immediately, cease using Mr. Hale's accounts or identity for any business purpose, and remit reimbursement for the enumerated charges within 15 business days. All medical and legal communications regarding Mr. Hale must route through Mr. Hale or this office. Please sign here to acknowledge receipt." She set a pen at the paper's margin like a small, polite anchor. Trevor didn't touch the pen. "He's being coached," he said, half smile tilted sharp. "This isn't him." I folded the dish towel once, then again. "I'm right here," I said. "If you believe your books are clean, you'll welcome an audit." Maya tried a softer weather. "We want what's safe for the long term." I nodded. "So do I. Safety begins with control over my own switchgear." The room held its breath. In another life, this is where the wind rises and you lean back into your belt and remember the job is balance. I told them the will had been updated to align with the trust. No cash distributions to either of them. Protections aimed at the child who didn't ask for any of this. Education funds exist, modest and supervised, I said. A good future doesn't require a blank check. No one argued with the phrase, good future, which is how phrases like that work. Renee noted that a response in writing was expected within 72 hours. She does not bluff, she calendars. We did not raise voices, we did not trade adjectives. I kept mine in the drawer with the potholders. What we did do was sign the delivery acknowledgement, or rather I did and Maya did, her hand shaking once, then steadying, and Trevor declined, saying his lawyer would be in touch. The envelope remained exactly where Renee had placed it, a small, square storm front you can't see on radar yet. When Leo drifted back to the doorway, I sent him to brush his teeth and thanked him for helping with plates. I did not speak of trusts or audits or the ways adults fail even when they claim love as their motive. I reminded him of spelling tomorrow and promised we'd wire the turbine hub after school. The promise mattered more than the hub. Renee packed her case and stood. "We'll see everyone at my office Wednesday," she said. The clock on the wall ticked in quarter seconds that sounded like a relay closing. I closed the manila folder, slid it into my backpack, and pushed back my chair. "From here on," I said, "everything runs on paper." The spoon in the sink cooled with a sound like a coin settling. Somewhere in the house, a vent sighed. The line had been drawn, not with anger, but with ink. In storms, that's the mark that holds. I woke before the alarm, the room still holding last night's silence, the way sand holds a boot print. My breath was even, like a line humming under proper load. I set coffee to drip, laid my wallet, ID, medication list, and the neat bundle of recent changes on the table, and checked the prepaid phone for the appointment confirmation. Today would begin with proof, not persuasion. I wanted a record as clean as a freshly spliced joint, something that would carry load no matter who leaned against it. The geriatric clinic sat in a low building that used to be a pharmacy, its windows glossy with mourning. The physician introduced herself with a steady handshake and the faint scent of peppermint soap. She ran me through the ordinary drills, the date and the city, subtracting sevens from 100, recalling 3 words after a pause long enough to hear the vents sigh. Then came practical judgment, what I'd do if 2 bills arrived for the same service, how I'd structure temporary access to my accounts in an emergency, what steps I'd take if a relative tried to help without authority. I answered the way I used to talk into a radio during a storm, calm, clipped, specific. She typed, printed, and turned the page toward me. "Your decision-making capacity is intact," she said. "The full report will be transmitted this afternoon." I signed the release to my own records and stepped into light so clear it felt newly installed. In the truck, I scanned the summary and texted a photo to Renee with a subject that fit on one line: "Capacity confirmed, report pending." I forwarded the clinic's contact so she could route requests correctly, then set the phone face down and let the small relief do its work. A green test light doesn't solve the outage, but it steadies your hands before you climb. By noon, I sat at our usual cafe where conversations keep their voices and the coffee doesn't burn. Maya arrived in a windbreaker. She twisted at the hem and took the chair across from me. Between us stood 2 mugs and the invisible history of every breakfast I bought her when money was thin. I spoke plainly because clarity is the kindest way I know now. I laid out 3 conditions that might keep us off the rocks. Family therapy for a season long enough to matter, a complete separation of her finances from Trevor's, and a repayment plan for the interior materials charges run through my card and his LLC. If she met those terms, we could rebuild the bridge a board at a time. She pressed her fingertips white against the mug and let a tear travel to the line of her jaw. "I'm tired of fixing everything with the next swipe," she said. I let the silence hold us a moment. It can be different, but it has to be true. I slid a printed appointment card across the table. Renee's office, midweek, notary present. No one is signing anything here. We do it where the lights are bright. For a heartbeat, she was 8 again, the girl who once told me I smelled like rain after a 14-hour shift. Then the present sat back down between us. Evening brings out certain kinds of men. My phone lit with Trevor's name and a throat-clearing text about having consulted experts. He promised to file for guardianship if I didn't agree to Cedar Ridge, calling it safest for everyone. I didn't answer. I took screenshots with timestamps and forwarded them to Renee. Then I packed. Nothing dramatic, just the way you pack a truck before the wind climbs. Backpack zipped, metal case locked, trust binder on top. I carried the load to the driveway with the unshowy calm work teaches you an economy of motion that leaves nothing for panic to eat. The apartment in the rail yard district met me with bare floors and a balcony looking out at a slim band of sky. I set the trust binder on the counter the way you set a level. Centered, certain. I plugged in the radio and let the static find its shape. On the old table I left one sheet of paper addressed to no one and everyone. Contact me through counsel. I didn't slam a door and I didn't explain. Some exits require silence to work. The lock turned with a small finish sound that reminded me of a breaker seating cleanly. Renee's email landed while I stacked the 2 plates I'd brought from Maya's pantry. The first letter rescinded any third-party authorization with Cedar Ridge and directed all contact to me or to her office. The second reiterated closure of the authorized user line and demanded invoices for each interior materials charge. A third set our Wednesday conference with a notary and requested that I keep Thursday open. Contingencies. I penciled the word into my palm like a field note and breathed easier. Paper is a kind of weatherproofing. It doesn't stop the storm, but it keeps your tools dry. An hour later, the light bent. The insurer flagged a secondary policy my wife added during treatment, the one we had discussed in a waiting room where time tasted like antiseptic. A beneficiary had been named then, Dana Quinn, a physical therapy specialist who had been kind in a way hospitals rarely are. The note showed my wife intended to revise the designation back, but death outran paperwork. Worse, the portal displayed call logs and email headers. Trevor had contacted the company within days of the funeral to clarify beneficiary issues and request duplicate statements. I called the insurer, confirmed the metadata with a clerk who spoke gently but exactly, and requested the communication archive. Then I forwarded the packet to Renee with a summary typed in block letters, intent documented, change unexecuted, post-funeral outreach by Trevor noted. The pattern sharpened, collect pressure points, paint me as overwhelmed, angle for guardianship while selling safety. Night pooled in the new place. I lined my boots side by side, toes north, and slid plates into a cupboard that did not yet know our names. The radio's soft hiss layered the quiet like rain a mile away. I stood at the balcony rail and watched the rail yard tracks lose their edges and settle into dark. Storms don't care whether you're ready, they arrive when they arrive. But readiness cares about you. From here on, I said into the room, we travel by paper, audit, and truth. My voice didn't have to be loud to be real. I turned off the lamp and let the breaker stay exactly where it belonged, in my hands. Morning in the rail yard apartment came clean and square. Boxes sat open like sentences waiting for verbs. The radio whispered a weatherless hiss that could have been far-off rain or just the room learning my name. I made coffee with the small precision Storms taught me, measure, level, pour, and set the trust binder on the table beside a legal pad already divided into hours. First entries were timestamps, key and door last night, lights checked, windows latched. I wrote today's date twice, then the word stabilize. I was not hiding. I was fixing the scene so nothing loose could rattle itself into a disaster. Renee's email arrived at 8:13 with attachments stacked like ballast. The court had granted a temporary asset preservation order, freeze on unusual withdrawals, no changes to beneficiaries, third-party contacts routed through counsel. She had already served the banks, the card issuer, and Cedar Ridge. Receipts followed, each time-stamped acknowledgement like a relay clicking shut in sequence. I made a column on the pad for confirmations and filled it in as the read receipts popped. Bank 1, Bank 2, card, facility. The order didn't solve anything by itself, but it changed the wind. Now, moving money would leave footprints deep enough to read. By 9, I called Dana Quinn from the quiet corner by the balcony. I introduced myself and spoke my wife's name slowly, as if it were porcelain in a sink. I told Dana what the insurer's log showed and what my wife had planned but never filed. I didn't accuse. I explained the distance between intent and paperwork and how easily grief scrambles a compass. Then I offered a way to honor both the gratitude my wife felt and the fairness we owed the living. A fund in my wife's name at the hospital for rehab scholarships with any excess beyond a reasonable gift routed there. Transparency by design, reports sent annually. Dana let out the breath I could hear her holding and said she had been waiting for someone to call with something decent. We agreed on principles and that Renee would draft terms. When the line went quiet, I wrote fund-draft-Renee and drew a box beside it to check later. The tax email dinged next. The State Revenue Office had opened an inquiry into Pike and Pine's use of my authorized user status to book interior materials. They requested ledgers, invoices, delivery addresses. Renee wanted me to forward any corroborating posts or receipts. I did not feel triumphant. I felt like a man reporting a downed line. Dangerous, documented, not my spectacle to enjoy. I created a folder named 2025 Case Pike Pine and began loading it. Screenshots of social posts with dates, the card statements with charges highlighted, my 10-month household ledger showing groceries, utilities, school supplies I had shouldered. Files synced to the trust drive and printed to color-coded sleeves, blue for financial, red for legal, green for health, yellow for correspondence. The order pleased me. Order always has. I changed the deadbolt and tested the chain with a tug that finally felt honest. The trust binder went on a shelf above the small scanner. Tokens and the prepaid phone lived in a shallow bowl where keys used to be. I FaceTimed Leo before lunch, keeping to the ground we share. Spelling lists. A turbine blade he sanded too hard, the way the wind snakes through the alley behind their house when storms build over the ridge. Tell the truth if anyone asks you anything about me, I said, and don't guess. He nodded solemnly, then held a strip of masking tape up to the camera with a logo he liked. We decided it would look good on the turbine's nacelle. When we hung up, I forwarded 2 new messages from Trevor to Renee without reading them twice. Neighbors are a kind of weather. Word traveled faster than I did. A man from down the hall pretended not to stare at the boxes by my door when he passed. A woman walking a small dog said welcome twice and waited to see if I would offer a reason. I didn't. I took a long loop on the Santa Fe River Trail, cottonwoods lifting their soft scent into a sky that knew how to be blue without trying. Footfalls set a rhythm my chest could borrow. I told myself what linemen tell themselves when wind shoves the world sideways. Hug the pole. Trust the belt. The belt now was paper. Trust. POAS, the clinic's report coming soon, and the muscle memory of moving one careful step at a time. Back at the table, I built the evidence packet Renee wanted, naming files with the clean grammar of good logs, 2025-order_temp preservation.pdf, 2025-09-pikepine_posts, index.xlsx, 2025-01-10, household_costs_summary.pdf. I slid printed sets into a blue folder and fed the digital versions to the cloud until the progress bar disappeared. Then I wrote a letter to Maya by hand, black pen on plain paper, short enough to read twice without getting lost. I did not recount sins or quote statutes. I restated the 3 conditions: therapy, financial separation, repayment, and told her the door still stood where doors belong, on hinges that open and close, not a wall bricked against hope. Love needs a boundary to keep from dissolving. I signed my name the way I learned in grade school, careful loops, as if that could carry some part of the old safety into a new shape. The rest of the day aimed at steadiness. I confirmed the meeting at Renee's and added a second calendar slot the next day for spillover. I walked to a grocer that still puts fruit in paper sacks and bought eggs, onions, a handful of green chill, a box of saltine crackers I didn't need but wanted. I made an omelet for dinner and cleaned the pan while it was still warm because small maintenance saves big repairs. When the inbox coughed, it was a polite acknowledgement from the revenue office that my materials were received and tagged to their case number. I entered the number in my pad like coordinates. Night brought the balcony back to itself. The tracks below lost their edges and became suggestion. Somewhere a freight horn tested a single note and let it go. I stood with my hands on the cool railing and thought about revenge and repair, how similar they can look from a distance and how different they feel in the bones. Not revenge, I said into the radio hush. Restore. The word settled like ballast. I slept as if the system had switched back to proper load and the breakers knew my name. By mid-morning, the apartment had the clean order of a work truck after inspection, trust binder square to the desk edge, token in its tray, checklist ruled into columns. I waited the way crews do when the storm line is isolated and the foreman radios, stand by. The inbox chimed. The clinic's report arrived with a digital seal and the sentence I needed said in dignified type. Decision-making capacity intact. I forwarded it to Renee, attached my signed release, and logged the time on my pad. The small calm that followed wasn't triumph, it was a properly seated breaker. Renee answered within minutes and said she would circulate the report with a letter rejecting any guardianship talk and directing all parties to me or her office. We moved immediately to the next piece, a neutral audit that turns argument into numbers. She proposed an independent CPA to review my accounts, trace sources of funds, and summarize my current budget in one plain English page. The timeline, 2 weeks with a draft summary sooner, fit the shape of the work. I signed the engagement letter, scanned it, and slid a copy behind the blue tab labeled Finance. Transparency, like voltage, prefers straight runs and few splices. At noon, we held a 3-way call with Dana Quinn. I thanked her for the kindness she showed my wife when kindness was scarce, then laid out our plan for a memorial fund, a rehab scholarship at the local hospital in my wife's name, independent oversight, annual reports, and no photo ops unless the beneficiaries wished it. Renee walked through governance and audit provisions. Dana asked the questions a careful professional asks. When we hung up, the past felt a fraction lighter and the future a notch more usable, like a line retensioned after wind. Renee's next letters went to Cedar Ridge and to anyone claiming to act for me. The capacity report attached, the temporary asset order cited, and a demand to cease all third-party scheduling. I watched each outbox email become an in-flight arrow and then a receive stamp. Process can feel like prayer when you're rebuilding, deliberate, faithful, aimed. That afternoon, Maya came to Renee's conference room, where the table was a bright plane and the notary's seal waited on a glossy pad. I spoke without heat. 3 conditions would make a path: family therapy for a real stretch, a clean separation of her finances from Trevor's with no shared accounts, and a repayment plan for the interior materials charges routed through my card and his LLC. I reminded her that love and permission are not the same word. Renee recorded the meeting in a simple memorandum. Maya signed acknowledgement that she'd received the terms and would respond. Trevor phoned during the last paragraph, his voice contained behind the handset, insisting that experts would win guardianship if we didn't accept Cedar Ridge. Renee took the call, noted the threat, and requested his position in writing within 72 hours. Paper isn't cruelty, it's clarity. Back home, I turned to small defenses. I rotated the passwords on old email, added 2-factor authentication everywhere, and pruned contact lists to a strict whitelist. Doctor, bank, CPA, Renee. I set up automatic archiving for anything with the words guardianship, Cedar Ridge, or Pike and Pine in the subject line. The radio murmured in the corner, a steady weather I could trust. Then the storm found its modern channel. A neighbor's TikTok began to travel. Trevor on the patio, coaxing Leo to recite that I'd left him outside alone, staging forgetfulness for a phone camera. The clip was sloppy but cruel, metadata intact. My throat went cold. Renee texted, "Do not engage publicly." We downloaded the video, captured headers, and walked it to the police and the DA's office with a short statement. By evening, Cedar Ridge emailed cancellations for all prior courtesy holds Megan from a local paper called for comment. I let it roll to voicemail and forwarded the number to counsel. Some fires starve if you keep oxygen off them. I FaceTimed Leo and kept to safe ground. I asked about spelling, about a turbine blade he'd sanded too thin, about the way thunder takes a beat to arrive. If anyone asks about me, I said, tell the truth. Don't guess. He nodded and held the anemometer to the camera so I could read the tiny cups. I sent Maya a one-page media note Renee had prepared. No interviews, no speculation, protect the child. Then put my phone screen down and walked to the whiteboard I'd mounted over the desk. On it, I drew a clean timeline. Capacity report transmitted. CPA audit underway. Letter served. Scholarship fund draft by Friday. Therapy intake if Maya agreed. Wednesday conference. Thursday overflow. I cooked eggs and green chili and ate at the counter, fork clicking lightly against a plate that didn't yet have a history. The ordinary work of feeding yourself is underrated medicine. Notifications stacked and then resolved. The clinic confirmed the report had reached the court. Cedar Ridge acknowledged cancellation of all third-party communications. The CPA sent a welcome packet that treated me like a client, not a mystery. Near 9, a text from Maya arrived. I need time, but I'll come to the first therapy session if you go too. I read it twice and let breath move through me the way line current returns to balance after a surge. Outside, the rail yard tracks melted into shadow. The radio's hush held like light rain behind a far ridge. I capped my pen, marked a small check next to each item cleared, and made room on the board for the next 2 weeks of work. What we were doing wasn't dramatic, it was maintenance. Strip back to good copper, crimp clean, insulate, test, restore. You don't rebuild trust with speeches or flames. You rebuild it with method, with signatures, with audits, and with the refusal to drag a child into the dark. I turned off the desk lamp and let the apartment settle. The system wasn't whole yet, but the dangerous parts were isolated, and the good runs were ready to carry load. In the quiet, I could hear my wife's steadier voice, and under it, the thinner voice of my own resolve. Repair, not revenge. Paper, not panic. Tomorrow would bring new work. Tonight, the line held. 2 weeks is enough time for a storm's mess to look like a plan if you keep your hands moving. My whiteboard in the rail yard apartment showed more check marks than open boxes. The trust binder had thickened with copies that felt like ballast. I brewed coffee, opened the inbox, and read subject lines the way a lineman reads a sky, looking for shape, not drama. The room had that clean, post-work stillness I used to feel at a substation after the last breaker seated and the hum turned honest. The prosecutor's email landed first. Trevor accepted a plea. 1 fraud count tied to misuse of my authorized user status and the staged video that tried to make me look unfit. Restitution would be paid on a court schedule. Probation would include financial monitoring. Any petition to control my affairs was withdrawn with prejudice. The note was dry in the best way. Final, without flourish. I forwarded it to Renee, printed a copy for the legal tab, and felt something inside settle with a small practical click, like a switch finding home. An hour later, the Revenue Department wrote on letterhead that meant business. Pike and Pine would be audited, assessed penalties, and barred from charging enterprise materials to any card that was not a company account. They attached a page on sound bookkeeping that read like a sermon to anyone who has ever stretched a rule until it snapped. I filed the letter under finance and marked closed/continue monitoring on the board. Work done right makes a different kind of tired, the kind you can sleep on. Renee called to confirm the structures we built would stand. The trust remained, Leo's beneficiary status intact. She suggested adding an independent planner to meet with me twice a year and countersign purchases above a limit we would set together. I chose a threshold small enough to keep me honest and large enough to let me live like a person, not a warning. The CPA delivered a one-page summary in ordinary English: income steady, expenses sensible, reserves adequate, controls in place. I slid it behind a tab labeled proof, the sort of word that turns noise into quiet. By afternoon, the hospital foundation welcomed the Rehabilitation Scholarship Fund in my wife's name. Annual reports, clean books, and no photo ops unless recipients wanted them. That was the promise. Dana wrote separately, apologizing for the confusion after the funeral and thanking us for a path that let gratitude keep its shape. I answered with thanks and no footnotes. You can set grief down without pretending it never weighed anything. You just give it a place that helps someone else carry theirs. At 3, Maya met me at Renee's office. The conference room looked like a safe harbor. Bright table, water glasses sweating a little, notary seal ready. I restated the 3 conditions as if reading measurements before a cut. 12 therapy sessions to start, a clean financial separation from Trevor with no shared accounts, and a repayment plan for the charges that ran through my card and his company. Love isn't permission, I said. She signed an acknowledgement that she had received the terms and asked for time. Renee calendared a check-in without raising an eyebrow. Paper has manners, it waits, but it remembers. Back home, I kept protection simple. Alerts stayed at $50. The planner's address went on to my whitelist. I filed the CPA's page, ticked boxes that matched the day's mail, and took a breath that felt wider than the room. That happens when pressure leaves and air remembers how to move. I cooked onions in a small pan, folded eggs over green chili, and ate standing at the counter, fork quiet against the plate. The ordinary rituals of keeping house can feel like tightening bolts on a structure you once thought might tip. Saturday brought Leo with a backpack and a grin like sunrise through a barn door. We tightened bolts on the mini turbine and carried the mast to the balcony. He steadied it while I set anchors. I steadied it while he called wind speeds like a sportscaster. The blades took the afternoon breeze and turned it into a small, useful murmur. We ate simple food and wrote numbers in a notebook he titled Power Log in block letters that belonged on a transformer. He likes naming things. I like letting him. Maya dropped him off and didn't drive away. She stood at the threshold with car keys visible in her palm, a truce flag made of metal and habit. "I want to learn how to tell you the truth again," she said. I nodded at the side table. "Put the phone there." She set it down as if placing a fragile tool. We didn't excavate the sharpest edges of the past. We agreed on rules forward. No surprises, paper for anything that touches money, therapy standing between us and our old reflexes. It wasn't absolution. It was a plan we could carry without tearing the handle. By evening, confirmations stacked into a quiet wall. The court docket showed the guardianship matter closed. Cedar Ridge sent a final notice canceling all third-party contacts. The CPA scheduled our first check-in for spring. I updated the board and read the line of check marks like insulators marching along a span. Systems are honest when they are stable. They hum instead of crackle. I rinsed dinner plates, dried the pan while it was still warm, and set our tools back where they belong. Before bed, Leo and I took one more reading. He held the anemometer into the breeze and grinned at the numbers. The turbine purred like a neighbor who likes you. Maya stepped inside, hesitated in the doorway, and asked if we had enough eggs for morning. We did. She watched us for a moment and said, "I'll come to the first session if you will." I said, "I will." That was all we needed to say. Some repairs don't begin with speeches. They begin with 2 people agreeing on the next bolt. Night turned the tracks below into suggestion. The radio stitched a seam of soft noise under the room's quiet. Justice arrived wearing plain shoes, and family did not leave. I looked at the board, at the binder that now felt like ballast instead of cargo, and at the boy asleep on the couch with wind still on his face. The system was holding at proper load. Tomorrow I would cook breakfast, take Leo to the park, and send the planner my budget. We would keep traveling by signatures, audits, and appointments rather than hunches, resentments, and whispers. And if the wind rose again, I had a belt I trusted, a line I could climb, and a way to bring the power back on without burning the house down. Sunday opens like a clean ledger, pale light across the countertop, a square of shadow from the truss binder, the small turbine on the balcony turning as if the day had already agreed to be reasonable. The radio gives me its familiar hush, that soft seam of noise that sounds like rain a county away. I stand at the whiteboard long enough to feel what the check marks mean. Closure without triumph, work completed to spec, and put the cap on the marker as if ending a sentence I finally got right. I have learned that love without boundaries is not care. It is drift. A father can drown in drift. I think of the afternoon Maya put her phone on the entry table because I asked her to, the click of glass against wood as ceremonial as a hand on a heart. We have a rule now, the phone rests when we talk. No secret screenshots, no pressure performances. We love better with guardrails, she said that day, and the simple truth of it crossed the room like a light switching on. Guardrails mean I keep the switchgear of my life under my hand. Guardrails mean she doesn't have to guess who is driving. Old linemen don't stop using our tools, we change what we use them on. Trust, will, power of attorney, audits. Those are my belt and gloves now. They are not weapons. They are weather gear. I learned to test every ladder rung before I put weight on it. Now I read every clause before I sign. Two-factor codes and low transaction alerts are the new rubber sleeves that keep current from crossing where it shouldn't. My protocol is the same one that kept crews honest in hail and heat. Evaluate, isolate, repair, restore. The order of those verbs matters. Skip one, and you're not safe, you're lucky. I know something else too. Abuse thrives in rooms where no one visits. The isolation was subtle. He's resting. He's busy with Leo. He needs quiet. Quiet is good, quarantine is not. So I keep my circuits warm. Book club on Thursdays where the talk is mostly about sentences that surprised us. A safety mentorship session every other week for junior line workers who haven't yet learned what a belt can forgive and what it can't. Saturday workshops in the second bedroom I turned into a radio and turbine lab, kids soldering clean joints, watching LEDs bloom under a breeze they made with their own hands. Leo shows them how to keep a log. He prints the title carefully because names matter. There was pain in making all this order. You don't subtract betrayal from a ledger and call it even. You post the entry and you learn from the math. The clip that tried to make me look unfit still stings when I think about it. A little burn along the ridge of my pride. But truth did what truth does when you give it a runway and a witness. The law closed the circuit, not to punish for sport, but to keep the rest of the neighborhood from going dark. Not revenge, I reminded myself when signatures piled up. Restore. It became a refrain I could work by. It still is. Forgiveness, I've learned, is a signed boundary, not a blank check. The law walks in one lane, the heart in another. They can run parallel without ever swapping places. I can decline to hand over my keys and still bring a chair to the same table. This morning I print the therapy schedule and slide it into a clear sleeve. I send the invite and circle the time on the board. Forgiveness can be as ordinary as being on time in a clean shirt. It can be as unremarkable as a door that opens when someone knocks. The scholarship fund with my wife's name on it lives in a folder I reach for often. Not because I need to reread terms, but because touching the paper reminds me that loss can be taught to work. A young patient will get help paying for therapy. A family we'll never meet will walk out of a hospital with one problem smaller than it was in the morning. My wife believed work should leave a place better than it found it. I tell Leo that's the only inheritance you can count on and that it comes bundled with skills. how to check your own work, how to tell the truth even when it makes your voice shake, how to keep a log. Identity is a form you fill out every day. Mine used to begin with lineman and husband. Now it reads grandfather, planner, the man who keeps his hands on his own panel. I am not a case to be managed. I am a person who signs his name in ink that doesn't run. When I reach for a switch, I feel the weight of it, the way a good handle tells you it belongs to the device it controls. My name is mine again on the accounts and in the conversations. That is nothing flashy and everything essential. Breakfast is simple on purpose. Eggs with green chili, toast from a pan that holds heat the way stories do. Leo measures wind on the balcony and calls out numbers that make him sound like a sportscaster. Maya knocks once and steps in on time. She sets her phone on the table without being asked. I pour coffee and we stand there in the sort of silence that means the sentence is still being written and no one is in a hurry to finish it wrong. Tell me one true thing you learned this week, I ask Leo. He grins. Always tighten the ground first. I nod. That will save your life more than once. Before we head out, Maya touches my wrist. We'll go slow, she says. I answer her with something I trust more than eloquence. We'll go honest. Leo pockets the anemometer, solemn as a boy holding a flag. We close the door gently, not like a scene ending, but like one continuing into daylight. I leave the radio on its smallest volume and look once more at the board. 3 lines to hold me steady in case I forget what steadied me. Repair, not revenge. Paper, not panic. Truth, not theater. The wind lifts, the turbine agrees, and we go. In the end, survival wasn't about winning arguments, it was about restoring what was true. Boundaries became a kind of mercy, the quiet guardrails that keep love from drifting into control. Paperwork, wills, trusts, audits, consent wasn't cold or cynical. It was the safety gear that let dignity keep breathing. And forgiveness? It didn't erase consequences. It simply chose repair over spectacle, accountability over rage. When storms pass, the work isn't to celebrate the wreckage avoided. It's to retension the lines, check every splice, and let steady current hum again. Community matters. So do small routines. A clean ledger, a kept appointment, a promise met on time. These are the everyday tools that keep the lights on inside a life. If there's a lesson to carry forward, it's this. Choose truth over theater. Documentation over doubt, restoration over revenge. That's how the power comes back without burning the house down. If this closing resonated with you, tell us what line stayed with you and why. Drop a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe with notifications on so you never miss the next story.